Oh, good evening, everyone. My name is Jane, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh my gosh, it's so great to be here at the Florida State Convention. You know, I don't know about you, but I've been looking forward to this for some time now. I want to first off give thanks to this program that helped to save my life, this precious, life-saving, life-sustaining, life-giving gift of sobriety. I thank my family, my faith, and oh my gosh, especially my Alcoholics Anonymous family. I've been sober since September 24th of 1996. Woo! And my home group is Central Group in Tallahassee, Florida. And I always like to share from the very beginning that my drinking run lasted for 14 years. I am so grateful that today I have this non-religious spiritual path, one of self-development, but it comes along with mutual assistance as well. And I want to thank everyone for being here tonight because it's because of you that I've learned to live honestly and truthfully and lovingly. I know that Bill Wilson called what we need to experience this vital experience, and I have a feeling that many of us are in the midst of some way of having a vital experience this weekend. You know, I happen to be one of the first speakers, and I know I have so many friends that are also speakers, so I know that you're in for a treat, and I know that all of us are here to experience love and service and, hey, maybe even that transformational experience, maybe even a change of heart. So anyway, I always like to start off with inviting grace into the room. I don't know about you, but I've always been fascinated with grace. You know, the song Amazing Grace and everything that just always hits my heart in a special way, depending on what's going on in my life. But grace is pretty cool. It is pretty amazing. It has nothing to do with anything that we've done or anything that we haven't done. It's just always there to tap into. You know, it's like this beautiful current that runs through life that offers us things like forgiveness, like mercy, like peace. You know, it's this very reassuring inner realization that we're already one with God. And that has helped me in my sobriety more times than I can even begin to count. You know, we are already one with God, you know, and there's nothing that can change that. To me, that's always been a theme in my sobriety. When life gets hard, I know that God is always there. One of my favorite lines is, "The will of God will never take me where the grace of God won't protect me." I have like that little thing. It's actually on my desk at work. You know, I've been going through a very difficult few weeks. I always like to speak with the language of the heart, so I hope that you'll bear with me because sometimes I might go on tangents and tell you what's going on in my life today. But I just returned from 2 really difficult weeks of caregiving for my parents. And, oh my gosh, that's one of the reasons why I connected so much with Stephanie, because, you know, she was there, we were sharing stories, and this is relatively new for me, but I've had friends that talk about it, and, you know, I'm here to tell you that you don't know how difficult it can be until it happens to you. So anyway, my mom fell 2 weeks and shattered her hip. My dad has dementia. I mean, it's just been a handful, and we're trying to get a full-time caregiver. So anyway, yesterday afternoon, I was wondering, should I cancel this or should I come? And, you know, but actually it was the day before. My mom and I, you know, we've always had this contentious relationship, and I just was like, "Ma, it's time for me to go. All right, I thought about it, but I got to go to this convention. I need to be recharged. I need to be replenished. I need to be renourished, you know. So I'm here, A, because this program always taught me to honor my commitments, but B, also because I'm engaging in self-care just by being in the middle of all of you. So I'm so grateful that we have this opportunity to gather together and to tell each other our stories and to heal as a result. I also have a big resentment going on. And yes, I've talked to my sponsor about it. Yes, I've talked to my husband about it. But maybe all of us, I have a feeling if you look deep down into yourselves, we've got a little resentment going on right now. And I always like to start with a prayer. So this is one of my favorite prayers, and it was given to me by Sister Maurice, who is a sister in recovery. And it's called the Prayer for Freedom from Resentment. So let's go ahead, and you might want to close your eyes and think about something that you want to heal from this weekend. God, help me to look with soft eyes upon all who are part of my days. Break through the barriers of my scrutinizing views. Transform my inner landscape into a peaceful place of acceptance. Pull back my projections and my criticisms. Replace my mean measurements and my biased expectations with an openness that allows others to be, just to be. Cleanse me of everything that clouds my perceptions and blocks the sunlight of your Spirit. Amen. In case you were wondering, it's towards my brothers, okay? The resentment that I have. Anyway, we'll get it all out there, right, James? All right, and now I'd like to just make all my acknowledgments. I want to thank, first of all, Russ for inviting me like a year and a half ago, and for always keeping in touch with me and communicating with me and making sure that I felt welcomed. And I really appreciate the time and the kindness that you put into preparing for me to come here. And I'm sure all the speakers will tell you that. You've been great, Russ. Thank you. And and of course, Robin. Oh my gosh, Robin is a workaholic. I'm sorry to call you out on that, but she works so hard to make this run as seamlessly as it has so far, and I think you'll see it takes a lot of organization, a lot of teamwork. So I want to thank Robin, but not only you, but your team as well. And And Stephanie, you've been such a gift. As I said, isn't it cool that you can just sit down with someone over coffee, and I think within 5 minutes I was crying and sharing my story with her, and she's like, oh, I got one to tell you too, that kind of parallels yours, so it's really neat when that happens. I also want to thank our interpreter. Many of you might know that I have a stepson who is deaf, so I really appreciate that you had the kindness and the thoughtfulness to bring an interpreter here, so thank you. And Lee's tapes. Man, Lee is rocking it. He goes everywhere. I feel like this is a vocation, and I feel like Lee has made it possible for many alcoholics like myself who at sometimes couldn't get to meetings and relied on speaker tapes, speaker CDs. I'm back from the tape days. But yeah, so I wanted to just acknowledge Lee, and hopefully you'll show him the love this weekend. So again, because I wanted to share some personal things about this convention. First and foremost, I got sober in the Tampa St. Pete area. I got sober at the Alano Club in St. Pete Beach, and I see many faces from back in those days. And I'll tell you something. This area has always had a special place in my heart. You know how they say the first AA meetings you went to, nothing will ever compare? Sorry, Tallahassee peeps, but we can't compare to what we've got in St. Pete Beach. I mean, I wish I could move back down here for the AA. And so I want to just really tell you how wonderful it is to be back in your midst. And secondly, bear with me because this is a really personal story. I spoke at the 2009 Florida State Convention. It was held in Jacksonville. And that is where I met my wonderful husband. So, it was so funny because I got asked to speak, and I remember it was my first big one, so I was really nervous about it. And many of you know Polly P., who is actually now my mother-in-law. But I was the Thursday afternoon speaker, and then Saturday afternoon, James L. spoke from Chicago. And I remember when he was sharing his story, I was like, oh man, we would have been in trouble together. Like he dropped out of school, he loved Led Zeppelin, he moved to California, was running Venice Beach. And I said, oh God, that would have been a dangerous combo. But I just thought he was really cool. And I remember when I got up in the line to thank him, so the person before me moved aside, and when we came face to face, I kid you not, I said, that's the man I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. And then I looked down and I saw a wedding ring on his finger. I went, oh man, I was wrong there. So anyway, so the next thing I knew, and I was friends with Polly, because we kind of shared together at a couple of conventions and stuff. And this one day I heard, oh man, Polly is so upset. Her son James is going through a really very difficult and painful divorce. And I was like, oh God, that's so sad. I knew it. And so anyway, the next thing, and then I heard he had a girlfriend for a couple of years, whatever. And it just so happens, this is Facebook, folks. So I was broke up with this guy that I was dating, and I changed my status to single, And then apparently James saw that and decided to go visit his mother in Jacksonville. And while he was there, he called me and asked me out to lunch, and lunch turned into dinner, and we've been together ever since. And that was 7 years ago, yeah. So, and I got to give a shout out to my husband. Many of you will meet him tomorrow because he's doing a 12:30 workshop on surrender. But I aspire to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous like my husband. He sponsors men from all over the world. He not only talks the talk, let me tell you, he walks the walk. I have never seen him get his feathers ruffled. He's always so level and so balanced, because of working this program the way he's supposed to. Me, on the other hand, I can be a little, fiery. I'm the fiery one in our relationship, but beauty is he can bring me back down, and we just feel like we're partners. We're truly a team, and I'm so grateful that he's my husband. And the biggest bonus is I think he's pretty hot. Anyway. Okay, so sometimes the dark past can be our greatest gift. I mean, our literature tells us that. And God speaks to us all differently, but I believe my higher power wants me to share my story with other people. And my story is one that does not involve a calm passage, but thank goodness I'm here tonight, so it does involve a safe landing. And I also feel like that for me, as for many of us, I don't think until the pain got strong enough we were going to change. At least I can say that for me. But in my case, I feel like all the things that happened to me, God wasn't really trying to punish me, but rather pull me closer to Him, her, them. And I feel like grateful for everything that I've been through. And so the main spiritual principle that I'm doing tonight, I think, is that when you give, you get back. So I'm just going to go on and share my story now. I'm sure that you've gathered I'm not from the great state of Florida. I am from the great state of New Jersey. And I just flew in from Newark, as I said, yesterday afternoon. And I come from a big Irish Catholic family. My parents had 7 kids. And we, went to Catholic schools our whole lives. I went to a Catholic elementary school, an all-girl Catholic high school, and a Catholic college. And I'll tell you, I'm one of those Catholics that loved being a Catholic, and I had great sisters who actually were like the first feminists that I ever met. And yeah, from a young age, I knew all about what, I mean, I think the buzzword now is like everything that's going on with girl and women empowerment, especially this Barbie movie, huh? Hey, did you get a look at this panel at the beginning? Talk about empowerment, wow. And so yeah, I attribute my early desire to be a fiercely independent woman to the sisters that I had. And I'll tell you about some of the influential priests that I've had in my life, even in recovery, and as my story unfolds. But so anyway, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad, I always like to boast a little bit about my dad because it says so much about him and the way that we were all raised. My dad was favored to be the first person ever to break the 4-minute mile. And he just missed it. Like in Madison Square Garden back in the 50s, track meets were like a big deal. And he won every major mile race in Madison Square Garden that year. And I'll tell you about one, but he missed it. Are you ready? He missed it by he ran a 4.00.02. So, and then of course Roger Bannister was the one to break it for the first time. But I think a fitting story to tell you a little bit about my dad was the New York Times every year does their best 10 moments in Madison Square Garden. And a race that my dad was in is one of them. So, the world record was supposed to be broken this night, and it's my dad and 2 other contenders. So they're running, record-breaking speed, and they get to the final straightaway, and my dad is in first place, and the guy who was in second ran and elbowed my father off the track, so one of his feet went off the track, and that's an automatic disqualification. My father got back on the track, ran after him, grabbed him by the shorts, spun him around, and they started having a fight. And the guy who was in third went through and broke the world record. And so anyway, and the legend has it that my grandfather, you could have heard a pin drop in Madison Square Garden, and my grandfather yells out, "Now take him out back, Freddie, and really finish him off," So we come from tough Irish, Brooklyn, New Yorker, stock. And my dad was super disciplined, and, you have to be a runner like that, but believe me, he instilled those ethics into all of his kids. So anyway, I'm going to fast forward to my high school years because that's when I took my first drink. So I was 14 years old, went to the movies with my 18-year-old cousin and her friends, and they just kept dumping rum into my Coca-Cola that I got in the movie theater. And I'll never forget that feeling. Now, I love the symbolism that goes behind this because the movie was the original Star Wars. And so, can you imagine? That was so cutting edge back in those days. I was just sitting in my seat like, woo! Oh my God, this is so cool! Ah! Flying around intergalactically with Han Solo on that Falcon Millennium. And I'm telling you, that is a deep imprint that my first drink left in my mind. I wanted to be larger than life. I wanted to be out of this world. It took me to this whole other plane and whole other galaxy, and I went for that every time I drank. It was like plain Jane is gone. I wanted to be outrageous, obnoxious, crazy Janie, And I, believe me, I did everything in my power to do that. But I didn't really start drinking full on until I went to college. I went to Manhattan College in New York City, and it was my first time to really experience true freedom. It was like this little Catholic girls' school let loose in the biggest, baddest city on earth in the 1980s. I mean, it was the time of the Limelight, Studio 54, the Peppermint Lounge, the Kamikaze Club. And I at first, I honestly felt like I was more addicted to the social life. I had FOMO, what the kids call today, fear of missing out. I wanted to experience it all, see it all, do it all. And I had Manhattan College is at 242nd Street and Broadway, last subway stop on the 1 train, right? So I had access to to all the fun. It was just a subway ride away. And one of my other famous claims to fame is I saw both the Talking Heads and the Ramones at CBGB's. I forgot to mention that. But you get it, right? I was out there. I was out there, folks. I was doing it. My husband always thinks it, laughs because I do it every time I talk. I have to sing my little ditty line from the Eagles. It was everything, all the time, life in the fast lane, and I'm telling you, that is the way that I was living my life. And it's a miracle that I got through college. I had a couple of geographic changes. Junior year, I was tired, man. I was tired. So I had the opportunity to go over and study in France. And so that was my first time where I said, oh my God, New York is really killing me right now. I need to get far, far away. France is kind of far. Let's do it. So I went to France, and I lived with a French woman and her teenage son and his 19-year-old nanny. And she and I tore up that town of Nantes, just like I was tearing up New York. I mean, it was crazy town all over again. And that's another, cycle that I go through every time I move. I left with the best intentions, clean slate, start fresh, and it was the same thing all over again. But I'll tell you, that time was really a cool time for me because, again, I was reveling in my freedom. At this point in time, too, I started to have big-time troubles with my family, especially my mother. And the rebellion in me was just all fired up. I wanted to, live everywhere, like I said. So I backpacked through Europe, and the one very valuable lesson I learned when I backpacked through Europe for those few months was that everywhere I went, I met and magnetized people that partied like I did. I mean, it's crazy how, we know each other, And so then the same thing. I go back, senior year, chill out, new slate. The new Jane is here to graduate from college. Forget about it. I started dating the biggest Coke dealer on campus. And sometimes I don't mention the outside issues, because we're not supposed to have an opinion on them. But I have an opinion on them. I absolutely loved them, especially smoking weed and cocaine, but far and away alcohol was the love of my life, So anyway, I'm going to kind of zip forward a few more years. I graduated from college, moved to this town called Hoboken, New Jersey. And Hoboken has the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most amount of bars within 1 square mile. And so I taught high school during the day, and I, was waitress in an Irish pub at night. So again, the cycle was crazy. And this is when, about the time when every line that I said I would never cross, slowly but surely I began to cross, especially when it came to my morals. I mean, I can't believe the stuff that I did. I was teaching high school. I was sometimes up all night. I'd have this vodka and cranberry, smoking my cigarettes, cranking my rock and roll, driving to school with no sleep, and I'd be doing bumps in the bathroom or using the overhead projector and doing shots. I mean, it was just insanity. It was insanity. I started dating a married teacher that I was working with, and he must have been going through a midlife crisis because I was 22 and he was 38, and he was crazy too. Anyway, I'm incriminating myself here, but yeah. But that was a big part of my story too. It was all about risk taking. As a matter of fact. If I could explain who I was in one sentence, it would be a hell-raising, rule-breaking, risk-taking, rock and roll fashionista, that wanted to just be larger than life. And as I mentioned, that's what I went for every time I drank. So, but it started to get kind of sad because, aside from him, I always chose drinking men or men that partied. And this is where my trauma would set in. We were actually talking about, ACEs this morning, about like early childhood adverse experiences. I didn't really have any of them per se. My trauma all started as a result of my drinking. Sometimes it would happen when I was in my blackouts, and you might ask, how do you remember? Well, believe me, I remember. Like sometimes things like I would wake up and I would just be like in this crazy put it this way, I would maybe engage in semi-consensual experiences and then wake up filled with guilt and with shame and with disgust. The only thing that would dilute that shame and that pain that I would be feeling was to pick up a drink and start all over again. And that became my cycle. That became my cycle for years, And drinking made my life bearable. My family started to not invite me to family functions anymore, and I would do things like, drink at them or, engage in really harmful behaviors. Was my reaction to things like that. Oh, you think I'm that bad? Watch this, like that kind of attitude. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then to progress, I want to just pass through a bunch of other stuff. I had another geographic change because I needed to get out of that relationship and get away. So I moved to Japan, and far away. And I'll never forget. Like I was on the plane going to Japan, and I was up all night, partying and drinking with a farewell thing with my friend. I even had some stuff with me on the plane. And I remember the guy sitting next to me was like, "You're moving to Japan, like, on a whim? I mean, do you speak any Japanese?" I was like, "Yeah, I know how to say domo arigato, Mr. Roboto." But that's about it. That's about it. But anyway, I moved there, and I thought the same thing, clean slate, start fresh, don't know anybody. Well, man, I hooked up with a bunch of crazy Brits and Australians and New Zealanders and Irish, and we just had the time of our lives. Canadians, we partied our butts off, and we got away with it. I mean, if we were pulling some of the shenanigans that we were doing in Japan, we would have gotten arrested on a weekly basis, but the Japanese are so polite, they just, put their head down and be like, "Oh, henna gaijin," which means crazy aliens. But and drinking for me was really easy over there because I taught English, and I stayed in the training center. I worked basically for Toyota, so I stayed in Toyota City in their training center, and they were on this intensive month program where they had to immerse themselves in English for a month before they were being shipped overseas to Toyota factories. And so I had to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner with them, and we went out drinking every single night. I mean, they were so happy to be away from their regimented Japanese lifestyle that they loved it. And I'll tell you, that's when the real cultural discussions would go down too, every night, And but I mentioned that experience because that's where I realized I had a problem, a big problem. That's when I started to wake up with those incredible shakes that you needed a drink immediately to just calm down. So I believe Japan is where I really stepped into alcoholism. I needed a drink in the morning to get right. I couldn't wait to get to my dorm room or whatever at lunch to have a drink to get me through the rest of the afternoon, and at 5 o'clock it was on. And I went to Japan for a year. I ended up staying for 3 years because it was so easy to live over there being an active alcoholic and working and making pretty decent money and being able to travel. So anyway, okay, then I get back and I want to, start a new life again. My family, instead of being like, "Oh, thank God she's back," they were like, "Oh, God, she's home." And things just got really bad. Those were some bad times. It was almost like, okay, this will tell you how bad it was. A week after I was home, I got my first DUI. And that was pretty bad. But, I figured, hey, for, however many years it was probably 12 years. Every time I drank, I drove, I mean, back in those days, I thought I was invincible. And I was a protected princess that none of those bad things would ever happen to. So my first DUI was a big shockaroo, And, but I said, okay, take one for the team, and I decided to move. Yeah. So this is actually how I ended up in Florida. A friend of mine, I lost my license for 6 months. A friend of mine said, hey, I've got a place down in the Florida Keys. You want to come down and waitress? I was like, sure. So I kid you not, I had every intention of getting sober in the Florida Keys. It was a failed experiment. It was a very failed experiment. As a matter of fact, the Florida Keys is where I really hit the skids. I lost that job waitressing within 2 weeks. I found myself homeless. I remember, it was a dark time for many reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons is because I started smoking crack down there too. But I remember walking around barefoot with a bottle of Popov vodka in my hand at all times. I remember, being homeless, like sleeping on park benches, sleeping on beaches, getting ripped up by fire ants. Oh my God. And I really decided that I didn't want to live anymore, but I didn't have the courage to take my own life. I just thought, okay, I'm going to do like a Leaving Las Vegas, like Nicolas Cage, drink myself to death, or blow my heart up by smoking crack until it blew, And I really wanted to die. And I think I was down to like 85 pounds, and I had the proverbial look in the mirror. And I didn't even recognize the person that I saw. And I had the wherewithal to call a cousin of mine that was up in Fort Lauderdale. She came and got me, and there's a long story to that too, but I'm just going to get to what happened. So I met a guy when I was temping in Fort Lauderdale, and he had this he did X-Adventure tour packages, and I was working for Delta Dream Vacations at the time. I was temping for them. And so he was living in Austria at the time, and he was here to try and just, investigate cool adventure tour packages. So he wanted to go down, guess where, to the Florida Keys this one weekend. To check out the water sports. And I was like, oh man, the Florida Keys, that represents a dark time for me. Okay, let's go, And so we went, or the first tiki bar we hit, we started drinking, and we did that as we progressed all the way down to the Key, to, the middle of the Keys, Marathon Key. Now, I remember we went out drinking that night. A friend of mine's band was playing, and we went down and watched the sunset at the 7 Mile Bridge. And then I had the great idea at like 2 a.m, let's go back down that road again and watch the sun come up. We got a bag of weed, we got a case of beer, we got, plenty of stuff. And so that's what we did. Only this time I remember when we went down the road, it said authorized vehicles only. And I was like, oh, well, vehicles, let's go. And I got on this road, and oh my God, it was like this road to nowhere. Like the Talking Heads song, right? We're on a road to nowhere. And I remember we just, we're going down this road, and I was like, where is this road going to? I mean, it's weird. It's like going nowhere. But again, we were on the old 7 Mile Bridge, and they had just blown that movie up for that bridge up for the movie True Lies. And so anyway, I'm zipping down there, and I had just said that to Max when, bam, I went barreling in to the concrete barrier that's at the edge where they blew the bridge up in the middle. There's a concrete barrier, the water, and then the concrete barrier. And I barreled into that thing going about 40 miles an hour. And all I remember is this like thunderbolt, this crash like nothing I ever heard before. And then like this bolt of lightning, just this searing pain that just went through my very core. And I opened my eyes, and the car was on fire. And I was like, oh my God, Max, we gotta get out of here. It's gonna blow, it's gonna blow. Oh my God, how are we gonna get out of here? And I remember I was just kind of trying to move, so the dash, my knees went right into the dash, and I completely smashed my pelvis. When I saw that thing, at the very end, I did see the wall, so I tried to brake, and I put my whole force on the brake, and it just snapped my ankle back. I remember I put my hand on my ankle, and I felt the bones, and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't know it at the time, but I broke my neck at C1, C2, and I couldn't move my whole left side. And I was just like, and the smoke was starting to come in, and I'm like, this thing's going to blow. And then all of a sudden, I reached over and I felt Max's hand, and I was like, Max, wake up, wake up. We got to get out of here. This is going to blow. And I thought he just hit his head, and he wasn't responding. And then it didn't take much longer to realize that he wasn't breathing and that he was dead. And thank you. And I can't even begin to tell you what was going through my mind. But the first thing was, God, please just take me too. There's no way I'm going to be able to live with myself. And I knew I was on my last breath. So I was like that for a couple of hours. And I'm going to share this story. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I will tonight because the police officer that found me said that he actually had a spiritual experience that night. He said he normally just goes down the regular bridge road. And he said, but something tugged at him to literally back his police car up and go down that old bridge road. And he said he was so compelled to do that, when he saw the crash at the end of the road, he said he wasn't even surprised. You know, and I'll tell you something, that really helped me. That really helped me because I thought, you know, there's got to be a reason why I was left. There's got to be a reason why I was left. So anyway, I hate talking about that part, so I'm going to move forward. I got heliported. I got cut out of the car and heliported down to Miami, and that is where I ended up staying in the regular hospital for 6 weeks, and then I got transferred up to a rehabilitation hospital for several months. And when I got out of rehab is when I moved to St. Pete Beach. A friend took me in. I got to tell you, my parents did the tough love thing. I was like, can I please go back to New Jersey? And they were like, absolutely not. Your friends have meant everything to you for the past 15 years. Let them take care of you now. I was like, whoa. But I ended up, living with my roommate in the hospital. A lovely woman took me in, and that is where I ended up going up to St. Pete Beach. And the judge let me out on my own recognizance while I underwent intense physical therapy. And Kelly up here was in the room when I first walked in. I was on a walker. It probably took me probably 5 minutes to get from me to where my husband's sitting. Because I had both my ankles were smashed, my pelvis was smashed, my neck was broken. I was in the big Philadelphia. And I was just a broken woman, man. And I attribute those people to really saving my life because, can you imagine? I just wanted to die. And you became the loving arms that my mother wasn't able to give me back then. And I went to a 7 a.m. meeting every morning. And I'll tell you, step one, oh my gosh, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. I had plenty of time to think about that when I was in the hospital. And what I heard from you all was, it's an honest program. And what I heard also from you all was, this is the first step towards the solution. I heard things like people like Kelly would say, Jane, you got to drop that Irish pride of yours and sink into a place of humility, I heard things like, you need to stop rationalizing, stop making excuses, and take full responsibility for everything that you've done. So I took from step one, my biggest takeaway was honesty. And so was I going to plead not guilty in front of the judge? Heck no. I pled guilty, and I got sentenced to 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. If you do prison work here, thank you, because you were there for me too when I was in prison, And I'll tell you something, I'm grateful for the 5 years that I had in prison. I'm not just saying that. I needed to go on a mining expedition to find out who I was without alcohol and drugs. I needed to learn so many valuable lessons, and I always like sharing this. I lived out of a Foot Locker for 5 years, But what I found was that by simplifying my external life, I was really able to hear the voice of God and to find out who I was, authentically who I was, without any distractions. So in prison, I did learn how to abandon that pride and sink into that sense of humility. I also learned, I think it's one of my favorite priests is Father Richard Rohr. I learned that there's great power in powerlessness. I also learned that what you all told me, to be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, because that would diminish my usefulness to others. So I really learned the true value of service work when I was in prison. I started a literacy program, and I also helped women prepare for their GED, their high school equivalency exams. And so that was my first taste of just how beautiful service work is. But most importantly, I learned to drop my ego. And I learned to recognize those lies and those self-deceptions that we tell ourselves. And after time, we really begin to believe. So I learned techniques and ways, and through my step work, ways to cut through those self-deceptions. And also ways to handle my biggest character defects. One of them, as I already mentioned, is resentments. I think it's an Irish thing. But the other one is being judgmental. Oh my gosh, I was so judgmental. I remember a couple of weeks before the accident, I went on a date with a guy, and over dinner he told me that he had done time in prison. And I was like, oh, I'm not going out with that guy again. So I really learned how to work on resentments and being judgmental when I was in prison. But mostly I learned how to be kind and loving and patient and tolerant. So now I want to just talk about that priest that I told you about, Father Dennis, who we're still friends today. But he came in to say Mass one Sunday, and he said, ladies, I just want to tell you I got permission from the warden to do 5th steps. So I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and so I signed up, hey, confession, 5th step, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, I'm there. So, and I'll tell you, he was such a blessing. He was the perfect person. I remember the first thing he said to me was, from that book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, he said, I'm not okay, you're not okay, and that's okay. I want you to just tell me everything. Don't hold anything back. I'm a Catholic priest. I've heard it all before. And, and please, I just want you to know I am never going to judge you. And when I cried, he cried. He was so filled with loving compassion. I remember just him saying things. To me, this was my life-changing experience was doing step 5. Now, step 4, I took the time to, do the searching and fearless moral inventory, but the way that I did it was I wanted to write like my autobiography, because I wanted, the person that I told my list to have the context of what a cool person I really was. But then, of course, I did it the way the book says, and I, talked about my resentments, my fears, my guilt, my sexual behaviors, whatever. Step 5, again, I said it was so freeing. You know, I put my humility to the test, and nothing, the reason why we do Step 5, nothing brings us closer to another human being than being humble and telling the truth and, and being honest. So anyway, and after Step 5, like I said, it was a game changer for me. My self-worth increased. I started to really just begin to heal. And after Step 5, too, I wanted to kind of keep things clean. So that's when I really started to look out for selfishness, dishonesty, resentments, and fears. So anyway, I could talk about prison for the next hour. I'm looking at the time, and I'm like, I better get going. So let me tell you about when I got out of prison. Actually, I want to talk about Steps 8 and 9 really quick, too, because that was really important to me. You might be wondering what I did with his family, and I was able to write letters. So that's how I did, I made my amends through letters to everyone. Now, my family didn't want to hear it. As a matter of fact, when my father was like, Janie, the best amends is changed behavior. So you can talk all you want. We'll see what happens when you get out of prison, kind of thing. And some others just didn't want to hear from me. For example, my deceased boyfriend's family, and that really boinged me up for a long time. But I remember my sponsor finally saying, that's between them and their God, and this is between you and your God now. You've got to move forward. And my other big resentments too were my family. James always laughs when I do an invitation to my mother. But do you know, when I was in prison, my family never sent me a penny, and that's pretty humbling in and of itself. I mean, I was using the state toothpaste, the state shampoo, etc. But my family had a meeting, and apparently my mother said, "Oh, you think we're going to be sending you money while you're in prison so you can eat potato chips and drink Coca-Cola? I don't think so. You're in there getting punished, And so it was like, okay. I'm telling you, I could have written Orange is the New Black. The name of my book would have been I'm Nobody's Boo because my ass is broke. I never had any money. But anyway, so steps 8 and 9 really was very important to me. And again, that was when you put the pedal to the metal, and I did. I really did. And I made financial amends. I'll tell you. Okay, let's move now to when I got out of prison. So all these God things just started happening to me really fast. Like one of the biggest ones that I look back on, I had to, part of my probation was I couldn't drive. I had lifetime revocation of my license. I had to go to therapy once a month, which was, for 10 years. I was on probation for 10 years. Are you ready for this? I had to go to an AA meeting every day. Every day. Even my probation officer was like, I never heard anything like this before. I'm like, yeah. And some other stuff. But my therapist said, hey, we're going to a women's retreat, AA retreat this weekend in St. Simon's Island. I was like, oh, that sounds like so much fun. I had no idea about conventions or anything. But I went, and do you know the first woman speaker that I ever heard, she was laying it out there, man, talking about being an abusive mom and neglecting her 2 sons, is now my mother-in-law, I mean, what are the chances of that happening, right? And then all these other little miracles, like I remember when I got into the cab, I got out of prison, I had a hefty bag of all my worldly goods, and I got into the cab, and guess what song was playing? I'm as free as a bird now. I was like, what? What are the chances of that, And all these weird little signs I was getting from God. So I dumped my stuff off. I went to the AA meeting that I still go to today, 909 Central Group. And this old dude named Coach Bob said, young lady, you never have to be alone again. And guess what? I haven't been. But here's another crazy miracle. I went to that meeting, and who was there but the women who brought the meeting into prison? And I had no idea that that was where they went to meetings. And they were like, when did you get out? I was like, today! But they were like, what? So all these things just conspired in my favor, and it really prompted me to know that God was working in my life. And so to make a long story short, I ended up living in Tallahassee, Florida. My first job was working as a housekeeper in a hotel, worked my way up to the front desk, and I did that for many years while I went back to grad school. I decided when I was in prison, if I lived through all of this, I wanted to dedicate my life to love and service, so I decided to become a social worker. And my work release randomly placed me in Tallahassee, Florida. And so that's why I went to Florida State University. And I guess what? I didn't get in the first 2 times because of my felony charge. The third time was a charm. My letter ended up in somebody's hands and gave me a second chance. And that's another one of my themes, is second chances. You know, where would any of us be without a second chance? Where would any of us be without forgiveness? And so, there I embarked on my new life journey of, rebuilding my life, going back to school, and so many miracles happened. I can't even tell you about it, but I will say that after I was working in the field as a social worker for many years, I got a call from the dean at the College of Social Work, and he asked me if I would be interested in a full-time faculty position. I was like, are you kidding me? Yes! Oh my gosh. So anyway, I have been there since 2008. I'm a teaching professor in the College of Social Work at Florida State University, and my specialty area is substance use and misuse. Perfect fit. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And I'll tell you, my life is so good. I've been through so much in recovery. I'm also a breast cancer survivor. I couldn't believe when I got that phone call. It was like, oh my gosh, I make it through this, and now I have breast cancer! Oh, and oddly enough, the next day, I went to the convention in Naples. Where's Peggy? I went to the convention in Naples, and those women just surrounded me with love, and my fear just dissipated like that, you know? And and then I also was severely stalked. I don't know if anyone's experienced stalking in here, but oh my God. Living in terror, living in fear. One of them was from a former student, and the other one was a former boyfriend who knew what I went through with the former student and started doing that stuff to me because he knew how I would react. And sadly, one of them took his own life. The first one, my former student, took his own life. He was severely mentally ill. And my former boyfriend, well, he just died. Terrible accident. I had nothing to do with it. But I'll tell you something. I know you might be like, wow, that was pretty cold-hearted, but until you live in that fear, and I know that would have never gone away if he hadn't died from that boating accident he was in. So, and I happened to be in, where were we? In New Mexico. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, about to go on a balloon ride a hot air balloon ride with James. I went up in that balloon like, whoa! So anyway, and I'm also here to tell you that my relationship with my family is great right now. I just kind of alluded to, my mom and dad are so proud of me. And I just alluded to the fact that I am here, giving care to them. And, really it's so hard to see these people who have been, stalwarts in your life your whole time, just depend on you. And I'm sorry I'm getting emotional, but it's so hard to see your parents get old and feeble. And I'm so blessed to have them. And I'm so blessed that I'm able to be there for them in their time of need. But man, is it hard. And I'm so glad that they get to see me so happy and so alive and living life to the fullest, How cool is it that we all get to do this big do-over, right? I love that. I have done so many cool things. Travel has always been my thing. James and I just got back from a trip through Scandinavia. We did Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And I got a personal development leave for the fall semester. James and I are going to Australia and New Zealand for 8 weeks. And my work project is I'm going to be interviewing and meeting with universities and recovery centers and members, specifically members of indigenous populations, the Aboriginals in New Zealand and the Maori, or the Aboriginals in Australia and the Maori in New Zealand, and I'm going to take whatever my findings are and see if anything will translate into working with our indigenous populations here, our Native Americans here. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah. So, okay, I've got a couple more minutes for a couple more miracles. Okay, I am driving again after 23 years. My mother is now my biggest fan, and she got on it. She was like, "This is crazy. You're still driving your bicycle everywhere. You're about to be 60 years old. This is crazy. This is not justice. I'm going to start writing to the governor." So she started writing to, at the time it was Governor Christie in New Jersey, and she was writing. And all of a sudden, I got this call from Governor Christie's attorneys, and they grilled me on the phone for like an hour. And talk about rigorous honesty. They're like, "So, in your estimation, how many times do you think that you drank and drove?" And I was like, well... For 14 years, just about every time I drove, and James was there, and I looked at him like, but I was like, I got to be honest, and sure enough, his last night in office, 6 o'clock, I get a call. "Hello, Jane, this is Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey." I was like, what? And he goes, "I just want to tell you, your mother is on it. I got all those letters that she got. And you make the great state of New Jersey proud, and that program that you're in, that 12-step program that you're in," because I didn't tell him which one, but I think he gathered it. He said, "That 12-step program that you're in has helped save so many of my friends and family members' lives. You just keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to give you a pardon for that first DUI you got in 1993. And, And here's another cool thing. Thanks to the voters in the state of Florida, you voted for voter rights restoration. The past presidential election, I was able to vote for the first time in 24 years. Any other miracles? So the miracles just keep on happening. And I want to just close this again by thanking you all first of all, for taking time out of your busy lives to be here. Personally, for being such a great audience. Thank you so much. I am really far from perfect. I don't get up here to profess to be like some, perfect woman that deserves to be behind the podium, because I certainly don't. I am not perfect, but I can promise you this. I strive to grow through my imperfections. And I hope you do too. And I know every day I'm grateful because I know, beyond the shadow of a doubt, a new life has been given me. And I try and make it a life of gratitude. I should be dead. I'm sure all of you should be dead too. So we have every reason to be up here and be grateful. And so my hope for you is that you too continue to take this high road to a new freedom. I wish you all and all of your loved ones safety, happiness, and peace. And thank you so much for being here.
Let's give another hand for Jane.